What's the significance of nanothermite?
The point here is that with the discovery of a high-tech active material, in the words of Dr. Fair, it blows up, when you heat it in a differential scanning calorimeter, as you saw from the narrowness of the exotherm. It's very, the rate is high. Now, we haven't measured everything we'd like to about it, but those data we have. And we compare it with known nanothermite, and it's very energetic and very rapid in the reaction. The point is, with the discovery of this high-tech nanothermite, we then feel that it's necessary to insist that NIST look for these materials, to stop pussyfooting around and refusing to look for explosive residues in the dust. And secondly, that we have an investigation in which we ask questions with subpoena power and find out who made this material and who placed it in the buildings and why. In other words, we don't have to explain all the explosives that were there or exactly how they were placed. What we need to find out now is who did it. We have not just a smoking gun, which is the gun after the bullet's out, but a loaded gun, right? It still goes off today. It's coming up on 8 years. It still goes off. Yeah, thank you.
Isn't there more than nanothermite?
The point is there's a lot of data that points to the fact that the official story is highly suspect and has just overlooked so much data. But there's a lot of data. I think of Minetta's testimony, which I think is very powerful, about what happened the morning of 9/11 in the bunker beneath the White House. No air defenses that day. And this is very strong evidence. And when you put all that together, I'm not saying just the nanothermite, that's not the only thing. We've got more and more and more. It just keeps building and building. We have plenty now. We need this investigation that NYC is seeking, or something like it, but I think that's a great initiative. The point is that there's a great deal of information in addition to what I've discussed tonight.
What was Silverstein's insurance scam?
6 weeks prior to 9/11, 2001, the owner/leaseholder Larry Silverstein had insured these World Trade Center buildings against terrorist attacks. After the terrorist attacks, he said that, well, since there were 2 planes, he should get double the insurance money, and he collected. I mean, he won that argument. It's amazing. But the point is, again, there's more information. I can't obviously discuss all these things in a short time. There's a great deal of data.
I just want to thank you for your fantastic work, and
Thank you.
I have read
Not
all...
just mine, of course. It's okay. Thank you.
Yeah, well, I have read your papers, and...
Good for you. Did you read the latest one?
2 or 3 times.
Wow,
yes.
great.
It's excellent, and the thing that I've been curious about for a long time, I think, with several of your papers is the fact that other investigators, R.J. Lee, the U.S. Geological Survey, and the EPA have all found similar materials, except they haven't bothered to explain them. And I just wonder if you could say a few words about efforts that you've made to discuss this with them, or if they've made any effort at all to explain it.
Good question. We know that the USGS has samples of the World Trade Center dust, and I've written to them and asked them if they observed red-gray chips. They have not responded. I asked this verbally on August 26, 2008, during the public input portion with NIST, a discussion of World Trade Center 7. I asked them if they'd look for these materials. They just kind of skipped over that. They didn't even say whether they had World Trade Center dust samples or not. That's NIST. With R.J. Lee, I have spoken to one of the principal scientists by telephone. I asked her if they had observed red-gray chips in the World Trade Center dust. There's a lot of them, and even though they're small, they're very striking to the eye. with even a small loop, you pick these out. Now this is material that now we've concentrated with a magnet, so it makes it easier. But then they're very easy to see. And I saw that with the naked eye first in one of Jeanette McKinley's samples. It happened to be a large piece. It was about 3/16 of an inch long. It was this bright orange color. I thought, man, that's wild. Look at that. And I thought, of course, early on that might be paint, but it turns out to have all these other explosive characteristics. Anyway, called R.J. Lee, and I asked them, she said, her answer was, she didn't say yay or nay. She said, well, we did this work for an insurance company, and you would have to pay me to, to check our data and see if it's there. And so I said, okay, let's start an email. And I emailed her. I said, okay, you tell me how much it'll cost, and we'll come up with the funds to have you tell us what you found, these red-gray chips. She never responded. That was the end of that. It's like, I don't want to lose my job. I don't know what was the situation there, but the data are there. With USGS and NIST, these are taxpayer-funded outfits, right? Taxpayer-funded. So they, we should be able to get information from them as citizens and taxpayers. So far, no go, but we should be able to. We're trying. We have FOIA. We have some pretty good people in the community who are using FOIA to try to extract information from these nationally funded labs, federally funded.
I have some questions that are very simple. One is, when was this most recent paper published?
It was published April 3rd of this year, earlier this month on April 3rd.
And what periodical was it published in?
It's published in the Open Chemical Physics Journal.
I see. And have you have any kind of peer review from that article?
First, we had reviewers, and one of the reviewers was extremely diligent. A tougher review than, I mean, I've published over 50 papers in scientific journals. This reviewer gave us, it was half a dozen pages of comments and questions, and very good review.
Probably at this time you haven't had opportunity for many to publish any review of your work. So there might be just a blurb or two now to begin with, but nothing of any substance that's come from any great number of physicists on this issue.
That's a good point. Remember that I showed you results from, for instance, this result from Mark Basil, scientist in New Hampshire. And his work is confirmatory, confirms our principal results, and it will be published soon. He wrote to me that he would like to do DSC studies also. He hasn't done that, hasn't been able to get his hands on a DSC. So that will be published soon. It is confirmatory. And by the way, I think this is a valid point. Any objections that you hear, like these crazy, it's really quite a ludicrous idea that this material could somehow be formed just as a building collapses, and then you mysteriously get these red-gray chips. Remember, we did look at the Stardust Resort collapse. No red-gray chips. It was controlled demolition. And the Key Bank, no chips. But anyway, the point is you get these crazy ideas. Well, those cannot be published, but they do increase doubt in, I find, non-scientists' minds who don't understand. People who haven't read the paper. But until it's published, it should not be taken seriously in a peer-reviewed journal. You see, any objections? This is a very good point.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank
I appreciate
you.
your talk.
Thank you so much.
We know that one of the major reasons that they probably did 9/11 was for the maximum, especially the explosions of the two towers, was the maximum psychological effect on the American population, the psyop, so to speak, making us all really afraid. So this, the one question I wanted to ask is, like, would this 10-second explosion of these two towers have been possible by any other means of explosives other than nanothermite, and the time factor in which this new type of nanotechnology was invented was sometime around 2000 or so, and then the brief history, and is there a possibility that it could have been created partially with this operation in mind?
Okay,
at
two
time?
main questions. Let me reiterate them so that I don't forget.
A lot of questions.
Yeah,
Sorry
let me-
about that.
Two main questions. One is the time in which nanothermite was invented, and the second was, could any other explosive be involved? The second question, the answer is yes. I want to reemphasize that. It could be that there are, in fact, nanothermite matches, as discussed in the paper, that were used to set off more conventional explosives. That's just one possibility. Again, the hows we won't know really until, you can speculate all you want, until you find out the who. Once you get the who's that done it, the who done it, then you can ask them and find out how they did it. It may take some enhanced interrogation techniques, I might say, which I do not favor, incidentally, but maybe there's a truthful patriot among them.
Could these towers have been blasted down in that 10 seconds the way they were by any other type of explosive other than the use of
The answer is
nanothermite?
yes.
I see.
It's quite
What other
possible.
type? What other
C4,
type? Oh.
HMX,
Oh, that could do that.
that
Okay,
could have been used along with or ignited by superthermite.
I see.
Um,
Okay.
Now, let me say, though, we talked about free fall for Building 7, which NIST admitted. The 10 seconds for the towers it's really hard to get the exact number there because of all the dust. But that's not a real crucial issue. The crucial issue is what is this red stuff doing in such quantities in the World Trade Center dust? How did it get there? Do you remember the publications? The AMTIAC publication, for example, showed that the research went back about a decade, and this was a conference discussing nanothermite and other nanocomposite materials. That conference was held April 2001. So again, that's before 9/11. But the report says that goes back a decade earlier, work on these nanomaterials. So that puts you to about 1991. Plenty of time before 2001. That is 9/11, 2001. Also, the ability to make large quantities of metallic fuel, that was in place in 1999.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Several years ago in Oakland, California, a gasoline tanker truck collided with a support column, exploded, and caused the freeway overpass to collapse. And some people in conversations suggest that is an example of how these airplanes could have caused the buildings to collapse. Do you have any comments on that?
Yeah. Again, wild hand waving, which could not be published in a peer-reviewed journal. Let's look at this. A photo, April 30th, 2007, Oakland. One section failed. It did not explode. It was a tanker, as you say, caught fire and burned intensely. And as you look at the photo, can you see that there's one section that's intact and then the next section has fallen? And what happened was there was a failure such that it appears that the bolts actually broke, is the best explanation I have seen in the analysis of this. But this was a partial collapse. The structure below did not fail. This is unlike the towers. This is what we would expect, however, from the towers, had it just been fire that brought them, that was causing the damage. In other words, with other fires like this one, you get a piece of the structure that sloughs off due to the intense fire. That can happen. Bolts failing, for example. But you don't expect the whole tower just to give up, and certainly not in the way that we observe with these enormous clouds formed and then, bone and beams hurled 600 feet horizontally. So taken together, we can expect a partial collapse. So the Oakland collapse actually supports our view that the official story is wrong, because it is a partial collapse, not a complete collapse, whereas the towers and Building 7 were complete collapses. Again, NIST could not explain the complete, total collapse of the towers. You see the difference? So this becomes a point in our favor when viewed properly. I just hate it when there's this hand wave. Oh, look, it collapsed. Well, that explains the towers. What? Have you looked at the data? Do you know? Come on. Does it explain the red-gray chips, for example? No. I see. Couldn't be published because it's just not a complete argument at all.
With your analysis on the really scientifically, and it's great, but my question is, since day one, when 9/11 happened, I refused to believe that Muslims and Arabs did this, and with your analysis at the towers, and with 250,000 tons of steel on each tower become dust, and they find out that the passport of Muhammad Atta is right there. So, so I just want your, humor things about this, because Muslims really didn't do this.
This is a sensitive point, but I think a very good point, and it's in the first paper that I wrote, and it's one of those points for which I got the most criticism. I'll tell you frankly, there was one professor at BYU that said, you've got to get that sentence out of your paper, and the sentence was that this event has been blamed unfairly on Muslims. Words to that effect, you can read it. And I feel that's very strong, that it's just so unfair. And they've been the Muslim people, I know Muslims, I have friends, they're good, family-loving people, my friends, they're great. I think they're wonderful. And to have this blame, this horrendous event, when, in fact, the official story is a lie, is just totally, I don't have words for it. It's like a crime against humanity is what it is. It's not like, it is.
How do you ignite nanothermite?
This is a photo. It's in a Los Alamos publication. There's the reference down there. Applications include triggering explosives for demolition. This is right out of the Los Alamos report. The superthermite electric matches, set off with electricity, you see. Electric pulse, perhaps from a radio signal, a radio receiver, you set that off, and then you could use this to trigger other explosives like C4 for demolition. Anyway, the answer is that's another way. There may be other ways as well. And those could be investigated. But this is one of the published ways, by Los Alamos National Lab, to trigger the superthermite reaction with an electric pulse. Thanks for the question.
I want to thank you again for coming to the little town of Sacramento. It really livened up my night. Is this not forensic evidence for a weapon to a murder?
Yeah, it certainly is forensic evidence, CSI style. And I would like to, most of us have seen CSI, right? And they get this scientific evidence, and then hand in hand with that, you've got the criminal investigation, right? That's finding out who. Now, when you find a smoking gun, unless there's fingerprints, for example, you can't tell who. But you can tell from the criminal investigation who by asking appropriate people and getting witnesses. That's what we need now. That's why we need the subpoena power that Jeanette talked about in our investigation. So yes, this is definitely a crime scene, and we do need, therefore, a criminal investigation to accompany the scientific work, the forensic science. Thanks.
Do you have any ideas as a scientist where this volume of this substance that's explosive could be made potentially throughout the world? And do you have any ideas about that? I'm just very curious. Thank you.
So I guess as we begin our criminal investigations, you'd first want to know who could have done it, right? Who could have made multi-ton quantities of nanothermite. As I pointed out, this Amtiac article discussed the production of nanoscale aluminum at Indian Head. Does anyone know where that is? I'm not sure. It's a Maryland? Thank you. So that's one place to start. certainly those people there would know. That was 1999, I read that began producing this nanoscale material for this, sort of large-scale production I'm talking about now. And that would be a start. I'm quite certain there will be other places in the world that would have this. I don't have all the answers as to who those are. That's, a very important investigation, and there are people in the community, the 9/11 community, who are looking into that. I wouldn't be surprised if Russia, Israel, China, some of these technologically advanced countries would have that, but I don't know. You have to find that out, and then you start asking.
Norman Mineta, insider whistleblower.
I think Mineta is one of our chief whistleblowers, actually, and should be commended. Here's what he said to the 9/11 Commission. Now, I need to emphasize this testimony of Mineta was not put into the 9/11 Commission report. Go figure. Why? But it was recorded on video, and so we have that. And he has been asked about it since then, and he insists this was indeed the plane coming toward the Pentagon that was being tracked. Norman Mineta was the Secretary of Transportation on 9/11/2001. He went down to the bunker underneath the White House where Dick Cheney was in charge. And as Secretary of Transportation, he was participating in events. You remember President Bush was in a elementary school in Florida reading about goats while this all was going on. It's surprising in itself that the Secret Service didn't whisk him out of there. It's a danger to the children to have this going on, and he's just sitting there. But anyway, that's another part of the story, another puzzle piece. But here we have in the underground bunker with Cheney in charge, a young man reporting to Cheney, as Norman Mineta explains. Here we go. During the time that the airplane was coming in to the Pentagon, there was a young man who would come in and say to the Vice President, Cheney, "The plane is 50 miles out." Now, pausing. At that distance, there's plenty of time for air defenses. There are Air Force bases near Washington, D.C. It's probably the most protected airspace in the world. We had routinely sent up planes to intercept. You don't just go up and shoot a commercial plane if it's off track, but you do escort it and try to get it to land, find out what's going on. This is routine for the military. They are well trained. It happened over 50 times in the year prior to 9/11. Nothing was done that day, as you know. No air defenses, either for the towers or the Pentagon. So here the plane is 50 miles out. He reports to the Vice President, nothing is done. Plenty of time. The plane is 30 miles out, and when it got down to the plane is 10 miles out, last chance, Mr. Vice President, the young man also said to the Vice President, "Do the orders still stand?" Now here's a young man with a conscience and with some guts to challenge Vice President Cheney and just letting this happen. But the Vice President turned and whipped his neck around. I can see him doing that. And said, "Of course the orders still stand. Have you heard anything to the contrary?" Approximately 2 minutes later, 200 lives were snuffed out unnecessarily. I consider that to be an impeachable offense.
How was the explosive applied?
Well, again, this gets to the question of how. There is a lot of information about access to the elevator shafts, maintenance going on, the fact that one of the Bush brothers, Marvin Bush, in charge of Securicom, in charge of security for the buildings during that period. Again, exactly how the material was done, we won't find out until, you can speculate till you're blue in the face, but you won't find out until we have an investigation with subpoena power that determines who did it. At that point, we should have whistleblowers like Secretary Mineta who can tell us then how this red material was used, what's it doing in the building in multi-ton quantities. Do you see what I'm saying? We need to find out who. and not be distracted just because we don't know exactly how it was done. How can we know that? When you do a CSI investigation, do you know all the details of how? No, not until you find out who did it and why.
Tell us about William Rodriguez.
William Rodriguez is a friend of mine and very good man. Again, this is more evidence that should be brought up before the New York City Commission. He was underground in the North Tower. Is that right, Jeanette? One of the towers, I think, North. And he helped a lot of people get out of the stairwell because there were some doors apparently that were locked, and he had the key. He has that key. And he testified that there was an explosion and that Philippe David, is that his name? That came running out the inner portion of the building there with flesh hanging off his arm. And from the explosion, I mean, there's very clear evidence then of an explosion. And furthermore, Willie indicates that when the explosion he felt it, and when he felt the plane hit, I mean, he's quite sure that the explosion took place before the plane hit the tower. He's quite sure of that. So that's not, hard physical evidence, but the man's flesh hanging off his arm, that is physical evidence of explosive force in the basement of the towers early on, or very early on.
How were the demolitions controlled?
Probably radio controlled. In other words, I showed you the super thermite matches, which can be set off to explode and in turn explode other explosives with an electric signal. This could be from a radio receiver. You send a certain frequency to that. You set off the explosive in that way. So the radio signal could be sent from anywhere. I mean, there are so many buildings in New York City that would qualify. And it also could have been done from a plane or a helicopter. I mean, once you program into your computer, okay, I want this sequence, I want the explosions to start near where the plane went in for the tower, and then, time later, okay, we got time to program, I want the explosions to start near where the plane went in again, so it looks like that caused all this, destruction, no tamper, but, stuff exploding. But again, with a radio-controlled set of signals going out, and that in turn controlled by a computer, it could have been done anywhere, and requiring just, 1, 2, 3 people finally to initiate that explosion sequence to bring the buildings down. You notice the towers were not a conventional demolition. This was not bottom up, it was top down. We have seen other examples. Richard Gage shows now examples of top-down demolitions. I think the 9/11 Truth community has made it very clear that the consensus is this was not a conventional demolition. And nanothermite is not a conventional explosive, but it is certainly, as we saw in the Amtiac report, quite capable of being used as a shaped charge and useful for demolition, as these reports out of the national labs point out.